The inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. Over the last 2 weeks, the world has been focused on memorializing Nelson Mandela, the great liberator of the 20th century, as President Obama called him. In the second part of the program, I'll be joined by a young South African immigrant who was visiting her family in South Africa when Mr. Mandela died. But first, this morning, Sunday morning, at the Museum Center, Cincinnati is stopping to reflect on the meaning of the life of William Mallory Sr., a native Cincinnatian, whose life encapsulates much of the history of the 20th century in this community. 10 years ago, I conducted in-depth oral history interviews with Mr. Mallory that resulted in 22 hours of his memories and reflections. I would like to share some of Mr. Mallory's stories and insights this morning. Bill Mallory grew up in the West End. The West End of his childhood was torn down in the 1960s, but it remained alive in his memory. Not just the buildings, but the people who made the old West End vibrant and who shaped him. As a man who loved learning and education, his eyes lit up remembering the influence of teachers like Mary Elizabeth Broxterman, his 6th grade teacher at Bloom. She not only introduced the children to Greek mythology, but she allowed William and a few others to leave class early on Friday afternoons so they could go down to the Natural History Museum. His English teacher at Bloom, Virginia Burton, had an incredible confidence and impact on him, including entrusting him with major writing assignments.
And as such, one day, my teacher, Virginia Burke, asked me to write the dedication page for the 1947 yearbook. And in that book, if I can paraphrase, because I don't have it before me, but I think I can remember basically what I said. Basically what I said was that Bloom School was a stepping stone in preparing the youth of America to lead the country. And I said something to the fact that it was a trying and exacting task. But then I talked about the fact that getting along with others was very essential. Getting along at school, getting along at home, and guiding our progress elsewhere. And I said something to the effect that adjusting to personalities is not always easy, but we must study that and cultivate it. And I talked about the fact that if we learn how to get along with the students at Bloom School, we've made a great stride in all the contacts we'll have in the rest of our lives. But I also pointed out that nations could have prevented wars if they had only learned how to get along with each other. So, if we had developed this ability here at Bloom School, then we have taken a great step toward peace and happiness throughout our lives. That's what I basically said.
What I hear in that passage are the reflections of a young man living in the aftermath of the chaos of World War II. But I also hear the seeds of his fundamental beliefs about how we ought to treat each other. Those of you who watched my interview with his son Mark on December the 1st might recall that my very first question was about the way he restored civility to City Hall when he became mayor in 2005. Make no mistake, his father spoke about the value and the importance of civility all the time, including on this show before Mark ever ran for mayor. At the end of high school, Mallory learned another lesson. On the surface, the lesson was that he could achieve difficult things through hard work. That's the American myth. We try to sell that to every American child. But equally important, he learned that people are there to help if you are willing to cooperate.
My 12th year, a lady by the name of Selma Dubin said to me, "William, why don't you go to college?" And in March of 1951, my father had died from a stroke. My family was on welfare, and I actually looked at her and laughed. I said, you got it, you know, this is a funny joke you're telling me. You're telling me about going to college. And she said, well, no, William, I'm going to contact Francis Dowdell, who was the executive director of the Urban League. And he convinced me to go to Central State University in the summer, August of 1951, with an old bent-up suitcase and 2 pair of pants, and I painted the dormitories at Central State so I'd have enough money to go to school in the fall.
As important as those early influences might have been, the pivotal experience in Mr. Mallory's life was the destruction of the Old West End in the early 1960s. The construction of the Mill Creek Expressway, I-75, and Queensgate Office Park displaced more than 40,000 people, including Mallory and his young family.
When I left the West End, to some degree, I think I lost my way, so to speak, because I was spending a lot of non-productive time at a place called Duncan's Lounge. And my wife noticed that I was not doing anything productive, basically. And one day she saw this notice about Parktown. And she said, I'm interested in that. And she came down here and she fell in love with it, and we moved in. And from that point on, my whole life changed because I got very immersed in the concept of cooperative housing. I became a salesman, and I lived, ate, and slept the concept of cooperative housing, and eventually I became known as the mayor of Parktown.
Parktown was a grand, exciting experiment. Physically, an experiment by Alcoa Aluminum to meet the demand for affordable housing. But as a racially integrated development with whites and blacks living together in a cooperative situation, the stress was on community. Bill Mallory found his purpose at Parktown.
Well, I think what it did for me was to propel me to my destiny, because once I moved to Parktown and became the mayor of Parktown, I also got elected president of the West End Community Council. And as such, I gained citywide exposure. And from there, of course, I ran for office in 1966 and was elected to the Ohio State Legislature. So the move that my wife made really changed my whole life forever.
Mr. Mallory could talk for hours, he did, about his 28-year career in the Ohio House of Representatives, much of that as the majority floor leader, about the people he served with, the legislation he was involved in passing or fighting, the tactical maneuvering. What was not been written about so much, but what I think is a sequence of efforts that reveal not only his commitment to principle, but his imagination, was his challenge of the way that Hamilton County municipal judges were elected beginning in the mid-1960s. The way he told the story is a brilliant lesson in how government works and why, to this day, African Americans are suspicious of people like me who believe in metro government.
I might give you a little bit of history. In 1965, William Lovelace, a Republican, black Republican, ran for what was then known as the Cincinnati Municipal Court. In a field of 8, he ran third and was elected. That was in 1965. When I went to the legislature in 1967, one of the first bills I faced was a bill to create a countywide court called the Hamilton County Municipal Court. And for a great number of years after that, no black, whether he was a Democrat, independent, or Republican, was elected into the court system of Ohio. Now, the first effort to change that was attempted by Jim Lucan, who basically tried to divide the county into one district and the city in one district. Senator Bowen tried it, and then I was the third one to try it. Now, as majority leader of the House, I used the same approach. District 1 would be all of the city of Cincinnati. District 2 would be the county. What I was trying to come up with a bill with parity, but I soon learned that in politics, people are not looking for parity. They're looking for an advantage. Even though they would have had 7 Republicans, we had 7 Democrats. I got it passed through the House, got it sent to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and strangely enough, I got the support of the Republican Senate Judiciary Committee, which was headed by Paul Pfeiffer. I got the support of Senator Drake from Cleveland, and I got it passed out of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Now, I got 2 more hurdles, the Rules Committee and on to the Senate floor. But it was lying in the Rules Committee not moving. So I wrote a letter to then President of the Senate, Stan Aronoff. And I said to him, either you pass my bill or I'm going to give you some federal scrutiny. Well, he never replied to my letter. I never got the action I sought. So I called, I can talk about this now, I couldn't talk about this years ago. I called Judge Nathaniel Jones, and I asked him, could I possibly have a case under the Voting Rights Act? He said, yes, you could. I said, if I wanted to get a lawyer, who should I get? He said, you get Thomas Atkins, who was a nationally known civil rights lawyer. And in 1993, after 7 years of battle, we won the case. Now, during that period, we were being told, and I've been told this all my life and things I tried to do, it's going to create chaos, you're going to destroy the system. Now, I would challenge anybody to tell me, have they heard one complaint about the Hamilton County Municipal Court? One. In fact, judges who would never be on the bench, white and black, are now sitting on the bench because they don't have to run countywide. They don't need to spend all that money for television.
Bill Mallory was determined, and he saw it through. Join me after a short break, and we'll be joined and talk and shift to Nelson Mandela from the eyes of a young South African.
Our nation has lost its greatest son. Our people have lost a father.
Since the death of Nelson Mandela on December the 5th, the world has mourned and celebrated his life and leadership. Welcome back. For most Americans, Nelson Mandela is a familiar but distant figure. For South Africans, he is family. I am joined this morning by Janice Liebenberg, the Sponsorship and Operations Coordinator for the Scripps National Spelling Bee. Janice is South African who came to Cincinnati in 1999. Janice, welcome to Newsmakers.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
You and I have gotten to know each other a little bit, especially over the past year when you were in our Sea Change program, but you mentioned to me where you were when Nelson Mandela died.
Yes. So my family and I just saw the new movie.
Well, let's make the point. You were back in South Africa.
That's correct, yes. Stepping back a little bit here. I was in Cape Town, South Africa, when I heard the news.
Okay.
So we had just seen the new movie, Long Walk to Freedom, and we had already decided after watching the movie that we were going to be talking about Nelson Mandela for the rest of the evening. But it wasn't until we got to our home that my husband got a text, a breaking news alert on his phone that Nelson Mandela had died. And I was in shock. I was in shock. And I don't really know why, because I knew he was 95 years old. I knew his health was declining. And but I guess it was because we hadn't heard from him or his condition in a couple of months. And all I could hope for was that his last days were dignified and representative of the way he lived his life. But, you know, soon after, it became a celebration. We started celebrating and remembering this man that led us to freedom.
And for you, how old were you, or when do you have earliest memories of this Nelson Mandela as a person?
I was about 13 years old when I first learned about him. It was the day he was released from prison. It was on the news. Everybody was talking about him. And I know that before then, I didn't know who he was. I was growing up in a province that was predominantly white, so he wasn't talked about much where I came from. But I do remember sitting in front of the television, the small television, back in the day with my parents and my siblings. I'm one of 8 kids, and we watched the news as he was released from prison.
What were your parents saying that day, or what do you remember in the? Well, because there's always, you know, how we look back after he was released. He ultimately becomes president. He then has this very long and dignified role as former president. And so you then remember some of that. But do you have any sense of what was being said in your family that day?
I remember it was a happy day for them. You know, Nelson Mandela was portrayed as a terrorist for a very long time, and even with this news broadcast when he was released, that he was a terrorist and these are the terrible things he did. But I do remember it was a happy day in my home.
Mm-hmm. And did your parents, how did they feel about him as a political figure?
I mean, I don't remember, you know, from that day, but I do remember that it started my mother to get involved in politics on a grassroots level. And so ever since then, you know, we were introduced little by little to what's going on the political scene. And it was because my mother was inspired to get involved.
Mm-hmm. What about when he actually became president? We've seen much of over the past couple of weeks, we've seen a lot of the footage of when he was sworn in as the president. So
Yes.
you would have been, is that 6 years later or 4 or 5 years later?
Yes.
So you're even older, more
Yes.
politically conscious.
Yes, I voted in that election, my first vote ever, and it was my family's first vote ever. I do remember being in secondary school, and I had this teacher who was white, and we would go to class and he was not there because he had to go vote, and we're like, okay, well, nobody else in the school got to vote. But I do remember taking part in my very first election in '94, and I did vote, and it was a great time in our country. We certainly felt free, you know, we helped put Nelson Mandela where he was, and it was just a celebration. We waited so long to be able to vote, and we got the chance to do that and be part of that democracy.
I know you've been living, and we'll talk a little bit about coming to the United States, but what do you think the relationships are on this question of freedom and this question of even the pronoun we? Who is the we in South Africa? I mean, one of the great things about Nelson Mandela is how he held up the example of not holding a grudge, not getting retribution, of pulling people together. Is South Africa, when you go home, do you feel that there's much more of a we there rather than a them and us?
Yes, yes I do. And that's why it was so important for me to be in South Africa when I heard the news. I wanted to be with my fellow countrymen and, you know, mourned and celebrated with them. But yes, there is definitely a we in South Africa. And back in the day when the races were divided, there were 4 categories. It was white, black, colored, which I was considered because I was of mixed race, and then there was Indian, and so I think when he won, you know, we finally became one nation. And I can tell you this, that on my passport it says that my heritage or my race is I am a South African citizen. There is no color, there's no race mentioned. We are South African citizens.
Given all of that, given the energy there and the hopefulness and all of that, and you voted that first time, what brought you to the United States?
I wanted to go to college. And I needed a job that would pay for college. So I was only going to come for 1 year. And I came to the United States to be an au pair for a year. So I was going to save up all this money, go back home, and go to college. But, you know, I had some help. But everything just seemed so easy here in the United States. And
what's that mean? What's easy mean?
You know, college was attainable. And the government here, you know, helped you, you know, get and go to college. And so it wasn't possible for me when I was back in South Africa. You know, I couldn't have a job and go to school. I had to pick one, and you know, the two don't exist without the other. So I needed to have a job and save up as much as I can to be able to pay for college. But when I came here, I just by chance, you know, applied to the University of Cincinnati, and I was accepted, and I had a few good friends that really helped me change my one-year visa into a student visa to be able to stay to go to college.
Mm-hmm. And what did you major in? What were you driven by?
You know, I wanted to give back, so I was a psychology major. Mm-hmm. And I only went the 4 years, but I always felt, and this is probably, and this is inspiration from Nelson Mandela, just to, you know, dream a little bigger, reach a little higher, and do a little bit more good every day of your life. And so I wanted to give back and work with kids that, you know, had some special needs or underprivileged kids, and that's why I went into psychology. I never used it, but I think it served me every day of my life since I graduated. And
now you work for the spelling bee.
Yes.
How does that fit into this image, and what's happening with the spelling bee? Because I think there are some things happening about even taking it international, right?
Well, yes, we are dreaming big. We do want to take it international. We certainly see the interest from all around the world, and they want to be part of the Scripps National Spelling Bee. So. We're still thinking about it. We're still evaluating. We're doing our research. We did make an announcement that we are doing our research, and we will definitely, you know, bring it to life as soon as we have everything that we need to bring it to life.
Coming from South Africa, working for the spelling bee, is the American dictionary and the dictionary in South Africa, the English dictionary in South Africa?
No, it's not the same.
I was going to say, it's going to be different, right?
It is different. I had to relearn how to read and write and speak here. And, you know, some words are spelled very differently. Some words don't even mean the same thing here. But I adjusted, and I learned how to speak American, so to speak.
Speak American.
But it has been a fun journey for me.
So now, how do you think of yourself? You've been here since '99. You're now married.
Yes.
You live here in Cincinnati. How do you think of yourself, and how do you think of yourself in relationship to Nelson Mandela?
I mean, I will always be a South African, but I think of myself as a Cincinnatian. I am home. And it wasn't until Scripps offered me this job that I could say, I think I'm home. I think I'm home. Cincinnati might be the place for me, but always in my heart, I will be proudly South African. And it's a tribute to what Nelson Mandela, you know, meant to me and to the rest of South Africa. I mean, he freed us from apartheid. He led us to freedom, and I will always be grateful for that.
The movie that was out a couple of years ago, Invictus, mm-hmm. and that all around the rugby team and the putting on the Springbok jersey. Am
yes.
I getting that right?
With the big number 6 on the back, yes.
Yeah. Do you remember when that moment occurred, and what was your reaction then?
You know, everyone say that rugby was a white sport. No, it wasn't just a white sport. I was colored. It was a colored sport too. We loved that game. And so when we saw that happen, it was just tremendous. Here is a man that probably never seen the game, but he he's out there with the team captain, Francois Pienaar at the time. And most of that movie is so true. He used the game of rugby and the World Cup, mm-hmm. and he used it to bring, you know, people from all races together. And we won the World Cup, which was so great, and everyone believed, and it was very special. It was very special.
Are you hopeful about South Africa moving forward?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. And I can tell you that there are a lot of things that that needs work, but we're a young democracy. You know, unemployment is really high. We have some illegal immigrants, and we have a lot of refugees seeking asylum in South Africa. And we do have a HIV/AIDS pandemic, but it's a young democracy, you know. Things are not going to happen overnight, but I'm hopeful.
Thank you very much for being here and sharing your thoughts and your memories.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week, and I will be joined by the Cincinnati Chief of Police, Jeffrey Blackwell. Have a good week.
Thank you so much.